So, the hottest topic in Sorare right now is without doubt rolling locks, DNPs, changing the deadline for different game weeks. And overall, a lot of good points have been made. Maybe it's done to death, but ultimately, quite a few key points haven't been made or haven't been made with enough emphasis, particularly on content. So here I am to hopefully knock some sense into some people about Sorare, the game we all love. Now, where to start? I'll start with this might not even be happening. Where this speculation has come from is A, changing the deadline of the Champions League game coming up this week, this Champions Night special. Now, that's completely different to anything else we'll see in football this season, where every single game in that game week kicks off at the same time. So that's one point. The other point is that in the common mode, you are able to, sort of rolling lock, change your player if they've not played. I haven't actually tried it if one of them's played, but I've seen you can do it, after the deadline. That's interesting, but it wasn't announced, wasn't saying they were testing it. It's just people making a mountain out of a molehill in one regard, and I understand at the same time they're clearly testing it to some regard, so let that be that. Now I'm going to drill straight into rolling locks. And my strong opinion is I've heard about it for years and I've considered it. I've spoke to so many different people about it, pro, against. And ultimately, in this current Sorare setup, it should be 100% strongly against. Now, I'm going to caveat immediately and say I don't think it's ultimately bad for a Sorare platform or a fantasy football platform as a more broad term here to have rolling locks as their system that they use every single week. But I don't think it works out well for Sorare, and I definitely don't think it works so well for Sorare 2.0. What I mean by that is that we have just had this huge, overwhelming change. It came February, March last year in 2024, where a lot of the rules and a lot of the concepts, a lot of the competitions on Sorare changed quite drastically. And that is never a good thing, because there's people that like the old version, there's people that like the new version. That causes arguments, that causes people to sell up. Realistically, it doesn't bring much good. It's just a necessary evil at times. So if you consider a necessary evil at times when you make these big changes, you look to Sorare 1.0, consistently falling card values, new users not joining the platform. I could accept that this one-time event that's going to half and maybe a little more classic card prices was necessary for the changes to 2.0. Now, why do I bring that up? Because currently, Sorare 2.0 is operating fine. New users are joining the platform, current users are here, there's not actually that much, arguments. Of course, there's always disagreements about something. That's the Sorare community at the end of the day. The current topic is DNPs. It could blow away in the wind as fast as every other topic that's been and gone over my 3 years on Sorare now. But ultimately, it's not perfect, but it is not a necessary evil where we need to make this drastic change to bring in a rolling lock system. Now let's get a bit more into the depth of things. I was listening to Harry Trades today on his point of view for the topic, and he's relatively pro rolling locks from what I've seen, which is fine. But one key point that I really disagreed with was that, the weekend for any workers are going to be the time where you've got the most free time. So introducing a lock system where you can change players and you have notifications on your phone, that should be no problem for your average worker. Now for me, I am that average worker. I, work every day, sometimes weekends as well. But ultimately, the big problem that Harry wasn't alluding to there was that, yes, we have a deadline. It's usually in working hours, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or something. But you can have, it's consistent. So you can have 10 minutes here, or if you're not going to have time, you can set them the night before and not have as good a lineup. Fine. But ultimately, that consistency allows you to plan your free time or your working time or whatever it might be. Whereas rolling locks, yes, you might have more availability on the weekend, but you're going to be needed for all of, if not most of the weekend, potentially Friday night and potentially Monday night. So I look at it as a casual, maybe a bit more than casual user and say, I have more time, but it's that ambiguity, it's the unknownness of when I'll need to apply that time that causes the issue. If I'm on the golf course, I'm not going to be checking every single lineup that comes out in the Premier League, so I could miss something. So then you're at a disadvantage to everyone else, and that's not just a golfer, that's anyone with, children or family or watching a movie or TV series, whatever it might be. There is a significant advantage to those that put more time into the game, which ultimately I know isn't really a bad thing. It needs to be managed. It's not ideally just a perfect thing as well. Otherwise you get to the environment where only diehards will play it. There'll be no, sort of cash cows, or no one just casual to put money into the game that just does it for fun, and the game will die out because it would just be, a shark's race basically. So when you consider that unknown when you'll be needed is the key. The unfairness that brings compared to different users that will have more time and less time and everything else in between. I don't look at rolling locks and say, that's a current improvement on what we have now. That's without even considering exploitation, whether you can just bring in stars, the fact that Wales will obviously have more depth cards that they can just roll out without affecting anything else compared to an average user. So for me, rolling locks is not anywhere close to what Sorare needs right now. You do not need an overwhelming change which is going to piss off an absolute load of people, might make people reasonably happy, like they'll consider it a slight improvement or an improvement. That is just not needed right now. You'll see so many people saying they'll sell up. And to be honest, I'd probably be in the same boat. This game takes up enough time to then say, oh, well, weekends are going to be needed. And by the way, Champions League nights, Europa League nights, every day there's pretty much football where you may or may not be needed, could be an important team, could be a nothing team. It is just not a good idea. And I will agree, it could really work for a different fantasy football platform. If you were starting up today, if you had, an Ultimate Champions and that was their key selling point, no DNPs, rolling locks, fine, it could work. No doubt, but not for Sorare in this current environment, in my opinion. That's nothing against Harry or anyone else I've read about it. It's just the way I see the ball. Now, the other point we have, DNPs. DNPs are both amazing and the worst possible thing that could ever happen. Why they're amazing, which is a hot take, is because it balances out the game. It adds that RNG, it adds that random luck that pretty much any game needs. Because again, we get to the point where if it is just pure skill and whatever it is, I'm not going to put money in to play Messi at football every week. But if there's a luck involved, people start to. Right, maybe Messi's a bit of an example, but there's someone that's clearly better than you at something, but the joy of it, like poker, is because of the randomness. There might be a better poker player at your table, but you're still going to have a chance because on that off chance you might win. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to be fun and all of those enjoyments. So that is the benefit of DNPs, which people seriously overlook. The downside, you can put as much effort into the game, you can be as good at the game as you want, and your fun is wiped out sometimes before we even get to your first game. I know exactly what a bummer of a feeling it is. It happened to me this week, it happened the week before. It's just life. Now, just because the game's set up this way doesn't mean it's optimal, doesn't mean it's the perfect solution. But please, before you start crying for change on DNPs, consider the other alternative where there is no DNPs. The game becomes so much less strategic because the best players in the game will always score well, 9 times out of 10. Yes, football is unpredictable, but a lot of the unpredictability of football isn't actually included in these games. For example, when Man City play and they get beat by a smaller opposition, they do not get beat by the other team dominating possession and playing in their half and they're just camped in. What will happen is Man City will get beat by not scoring. They'll have all the possession, they'll be passing it around, they'll be creating chances and just not scoring. So what happens in that scenario, and it's the same for Bayern, same for Real Madrid, same for PSV, same for Celtic, what happens, a lot of their players have really good scores, they're just not getting that decisive action, and typically a striker or, a winger that's had a bad game will have an unpredictably low score, your Haalands, your Lewandowskis, your Harry Kanes. My point being, there is no reason to go out and play a team that might get a result when you can guarantee, even when your team might not get a result, even Bayern Munich don't win, you can still put up fantastic scores. So what that means, everyone floods to the top players. The middle ground and everything below will just get shredded. Everyone's teams will just be the same. Then you're coming down to XP. Then you get people complaining about everyone has the same teams. Yes, it's an oversimplified alternative to it. But when you have a lot of the luck element removed and you just have the best teams, not only do the best teams perform very well 9 times out of 10 or 99% of the time, I know 90 versus 99%, it's not the point. Not only do they pretty much perform every week, on the off chance they don't perform, on Sorare they will still put up reasonable scores, -1 or 2. So, the life without DNPs is not the grass is greener on the other side that you probably think it might be. It is a one-dimensional game where a lot of players will just slowly get tired of it because it's a lot less fun when there's a lot less options and the strategies that come along with it. One of the greatest parts of a handicap system in Sorare is that when these mega teams have weak opposition, that's when they're likely to rotate. And a lot of the fact that people forget about these DNPs, yes, you get your unknown DNPs through sickness, Martin Odegaard this weekend. But these unknown DNPs are often people complaining about rotation of their favourite or their player that they thought was going to put up a massive score. And that is fantasy football at its core. Now, I've seen people on Twitter, usually Americans that play a different kind of fantasy football, say fantasy football is about who's going to score, the highest points on that game. It's not about predicting the lineup or who's going to play. Maybe it's just a different point of view from a different continent. But my fantasy football experience has always been that ability to not only predict who will play, but predict who will play well at the same time. Not just who's going to play well. Because when you add them together, it's a lot more strategic for a, 2 variable scenario to be more interesting than a 1 variable scenario. So, in terms of fun, without DNPs, life isn't that great. Now, does it suck too much when you get a DNP, whether it's your fault or whether it's rotational? I think the uproar in general, or what we've seen on Sorare, is enough to say, do you know what? It's probably a bit harsh. You either got the rotation wrong or you've got unlucky. Maybe your whole team doesn't need to be wiped out and you get relegated for next week. I can see that. I think that would be the scenario a lot of people were liking. I saw on Twitter some perfect examples of how this could be implemented. And I'm not claiming any of their, ideas, but it goes back to what I was saying at the very start of the video where we don't need drastic change. This current system is good, but not great. You can improve it by making it great, by just having less of an impact on DNPs. Maybe you can't get relegated with a 0 score. Maybe if a sub comes on or you use a rolling lock type system, you lose 20% of their score. Same for a sub. Or you have a sub that was, an average score of less than 50 or less than 45 or less than 48. It doesn't really matter. I think at the minute, if you look at the game and your team gets wiped out and relegated, it's probably too harsh of a handicap. Even though it's luck and it happens to everyone, it's probably not optimally fun, which is the most important aspect of Sorare. So, what do? A subsystem where you come on with a player less than 50, a sub player where you can bring anyone on, but they've got to be less than 20 score. Any of these systems, or any combination of different systems that is simple to understand, because me and you might be core users, but the person that doesn't have Twitter, really enjoying Sorare, he also needs to be considered probably more than me or you, because he doesn't have a voice in the argument. That sort of system where one DNP doesn't ruin your entire team is better. And to a degree, I don't really care how it's implemented. I hope Sorare do it smartly. My only suggestion would probably be something like, don't overcomplicate it, because I think finally we're in a position where Sorare is easy to understand, it's easy to play. Yes, XP is a bit more complex, but that's for your more advanced users. So keep it simple, make it hurt, but don't make it hurt so much that it ruins your entire experience. Please let me know your thoughts, and if you thought this was reasonable, maybe drop me a like. All the best, cheers.